in a particular way, in other words, if they place this sort of value on you, what will happen to them is that that value will deliver to them in that dimension likewise. So in other words, he said to them, whoever receives you as a person that is sent by heaven, whoever receives you as a prophet, he says that what will happen to that person is that that dimension, that value of a prophet that the person has received you in or has received you as will deliver a reward to the person. So in other words, if the person values you, remember that when Jesus was on the earth, he made it very clear to the disciples. He said, I have sent you to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So the tendency or the likelihood does exist that the people that Jesus had sent these disciples to, there's a likelihood that they were people that they were familiar with. In other words, they sent them among their own people, the house of Israel. So the likelihood was there that they would have seen them in a very familiar way. There will be a people that they know already. So Jesus was now saying that when you get to these people, when you get into their midst, if they would elevate their perception beyond just the casualness they know about you, the familiarity they have with you, if they would upgrade how they see you to the place of seeing you as a prophet, seeing you as a representative of the Spirit, see you as a carrier of what the Spirit has, even in this season, if they will value you from that perspective, there is something that will happen to them based on that value they place on you. So we can invert that and say, if they don't receive you as a prophet, what will happen is that the reward that that valuation brings will be lost on them. So in other words, there is such a thing as value, there is such a thing as a virtue that is delivered based on the value that is perceived or based on the value that is seen. Meaning that it is possible for a person to be in Christ and the person is not getting the full virtue that is available in this relationship and in this life that we have in Christ Jesus. 2 Peter, beg your pardon, chapter 1, verse 3 tells us that according as his divine power is not planning to, is not working at it, is not having a conversation around it. It says, according as his divine power hath given unto us all things, he has given, has gifted us all things that pertain unto life and godliness through the knowledge of him that hath called us to glory and to virtue. The word virtue here is different from the word virtue that we'll still see later, but it says that there is something that has been given to us in Christ Jesus. And it is crucial that we all understand, and not just understand, sufficiently state, allow it to resonate in our heart, stay on our inside, that in Christ Jesus, by the virtue of the relationship that I have in Christ Jesus, there are things of God that have been delivered to me, that has been delivered to us. It's a very, very crucial place to start from. In the book of John chapter 4, we see the encounter of Jesus and the woman at the well. And the Bible tells us that Jesus said to that woman, give me water to drink. And the woman was saying, oh, you don't have what to draw with. And the woman was saying all sorts of things. And Jesus said to her in verse 10, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that saith to thee, give me to drink, thou wouldest have asked of him, and he would have given thee living water. So in other words, Jesus was saying to this woman that the reason why you made your initial statement was because you don't know the value of what is before you. if you realize the value of what is before you, you wouldn't be asking for ephemeral things. You wouldn't be asking for things, but ask for living water. And you see that later Jesus begins to explain that living water. He talks about that which will flow from the inside of them that believes on him. So in other words, Jesus was saying to the woman that you have not perceived it aright, so you have not placed the right value on it. You have not made the requisite demand on it because you don't know. Because you don't know. We do not realize the gift of God. That is why a lot of us are not drawing upon it in the measure that is sufficient on an everyday basis. And I want to say this very categorically this morning, that there is a connection between value and virtue, especially in the things of the Spirit. There's a connection between virtue, and the word virtue here, if you go, for instance, to the book of Mark chapter 5, Mark chapter 5, you begin reading from verse 25, through, and you get to verse 26. The Bible says, and many physicians, this woman had suffered many things in the hands of many physicians, and she has spent all that she had, and was nothing bettered, but rather grew worse. Verse 27 says, when she had heard of Jesus, she came in the press behind and touched his garment. For she said, if I may touch but his clothes, I shall be whole. And straightway, the fountain of her blood, the hemorrhaging she was going through, Bible says, it dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of that plague. And Jesus immediately, knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned him about in the press, in the midst of the crowd. He turned about and said, who touched my clothes? Verse 31 tells us that his disciples said unto him, thou seest the multitude thronging thee, and sayest thou, who touched me? And he looked about. I mean, this is one of the most alarm moments in the scriptures. Allow me to say that. The disciples were like, how can you? And Jesus turned away from them. He looked around about to see her that had done